Let me try to put this in following terms. The figure of the limit brings external reasons or necessities, and these external necessities inform space of viable trajectories for human survival on the Earth, as we have already learned. Yet, we are at pains to reconcile these necessities with the predominant liberal idea of freedom, which assumes existence of something like transparent individuals. That means individuals capable of self-determination. And climate emergency heralds in this respect the return of external necessities that has been historically surpassed in modern Western thinking. And this is the kind of moment which reveals also a peculiar disjunction between self-realization of the human subject, which is governed by its own internal reasons, that is an exercise of freedom in its liberal sense, and external reasons that somehow temper down this movement of self-realization. And this kind of grand disjunction can be read as a philosophical dilemma as well, a dilemma that finds its paradigmatic formulation in the third antinomy of pure reason in the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant, which is the one between causality according to law of nature and causality through freedom. Kant rephrases here the problem of how to reconcile internal reasons with external limits. And as we know, his solution would be to split the power of reason between two realms, hence holding both sides of antinomy true, but in different registers. While the thesis is operative in the phenomenal realm, the antithesis operates in the ideal realm. But this ontological, if you will, delamination of reason's competencies rehearses a dichotomy that we are well aware of, and that's the dichotomy between nature and culture. And this is the dichotomy that has been thoroughly criticized in contemporary environmental thinking, be it in Murray Bookchin's concept of second nature or Bruno Latour's actor network theory. And this kind of political ecological thinking seeks to collapse the distinction between nature as the realm of external necessities and culture as a realm of self-realization governed by internal motives. And so for this reason, we can examine what is left of the subject's power of self-determination under the full pressure of external necessities. That means to privilege exteriority over interiority, and thus also pushing further the analysis of political ecology itself. And so this is the stage where we're also arriving again at the point where we can discuss more the question of infrastructure and agency with respect to the figures of comparative planetology. Because I believe there are ways to adapt our agency to those many new normals of our era, be it pandemics, climate emergency. The notion of subjectivity and agency I seek is one that would be more faithful to Aristotle's classification of the human species as political animals, zoon politikon in Greek. This approach would underscore human animality and thus would work towards an understanding of the political from this point of reference. And what we discover with this kind of viewpoint is also an oscillation between two positions, and that's the position of actor and vector. The central idea here is the idea of self-limitation again, based on exercising freedom by posing limits to yourself, as well as by understanding them and maneuvering between them. And finally, also by elaborating on these limits towards new modes of collective existence, something we have already discussed with Eric today. In post-communist Eastern European context, of course, this idea of limitation, self-limitation, these are hostile ideas, or taken as extremely hostile ideas, given the history of freedom and democracy in this region. And for this reason, it is twice as important to pronounce that the liberal idea of freedom, the idea we have been pursuing for the last 30 years also in this region from which I'm speaking to you, maybe in the wake of the ecological collapse replaced with a more complex and more nuanced notion of political agency. Because take this example, a very simple example we are all familiar with now, that by wearing a face mask, you publicly announce that the conditions of your existence do not end at the tip of your nose. It's a gesture that acknowledges that we all are still primarily interrelated intensities of biological mass, not some invisible members of a metaphysical landing party powered by an ethereal substance called freedom. We are just another species of political animals in the wild in this sense, something like vectors of alien particles, also vulnerable vectors many times. And that is where the new notion of political agency can be fostered, in how we bond or how we withdraw from bondage, in order to elaborate on our own limits, and thus to continually update our agency on an ever-changing cosmic background of reality. And so thinking about agency in terms of this provisional quote-unquote actor-vector theory solves problem of what are the members of Karatani's world republic to come, this kind of cosmopolitan situation, perhaps even realized in Bratton's involuntary cosmopolity of the stack, because these members of the world republic of the stack are not citizens, but users, understood as actor vectors, which are prone to what Bratton calls reverse prosthetizations. When the human figure is set in motion from some other position in the field, the subject becomes object, self becomes substance, body becomes metabolic reserve, and food machines consume you. In other words, we see here a kind of tethering of subject by a more stable object in the background, leading to a reversal of roles, meaning that in the end, it makes better sense to talk about these Schrödingerian actor vectors rather than about two polarities of the spectrum. That means subject versus object as strict categories.